Good evening. Okay. All right, before we get started today, quick two announcements. Number one, don't forget the Winnie Roast at Lonnie and Joyce's Saturday at 10 a.m. They say bring a couple friends if you can. Yes. So you can't count Johnny as your friend. You can't count me as your friend. You got to count non-members as your friend. We're trying to evangelize and fellowship all at once. All right. So Saturday, 10 a.m. Bring somebody if you can to Lonnie and Joyce's house. The other thing is October 18th through the 21st. That's a Thursday to a Sunday. There's the Memphis Bible Conference. Thursday and Sunday are travel days. So we leave on Thursday, come back on Sunday. So that's only 2 days, Thursday and Friday, that you'd have to call off if you work, a regular 5-day, Monday to Friday work week. Okay, so what we need to do for that is get a count of who can go, and then from there rent our transportation / our hotels as we need to. I know that William Bell, the preacher at the Rains Road Church of Christ, who's hosting this, he told me to give him any names and the names and the numbers of the people who would be renting. That way he can reserve the hotels for us on a group discount package. So just let me know tonight if you can go. If you're interested in going at all, we can always cancel the reservation if you want to go and be a part of that. That'll be October 18th to the 21st. It's a 13-hour drive. So we talked about fellowship. Boy, you'll be fellowshipping for 13 hours at least. Cage match style. So
Do you know what the prices of letting them hotels in the area?
The last that I heard from him for 2 bedrooms on their group rate, it was like $69 a night. But I'm sure we could find other options too besides the group rate that he found. So he said that there's hotels in South Haven, Mississippi, and hotels in Memphis, and that either one is basically the same distance. South Haven, Mississippi, if you don't know, is like right on the border, and so it's not far from Memphis, Tennessee at all. So he said we could shop around or we could buy in on the group rate. So, and if there's 2 beds and you want to share a room with somebody, then that's only $34.50 a night as opposed to $69. So there is that whole idea. You can share rooms and really cut up the rate. Okay. Any other questions on that? All right. So just let me know if you can go. If you're interested, I'll give those numbers to William. That way he kind of knows what they can expect. All right. Hosea. We're in Hosea chapter 2. But before we get to Hosea 2, does anybody have any Bible questions that they want to ask or things they want to talk about? Hosea 2. So the last we heard from Hosea, he had 3 children. The first one was definitely his. We're not really sure about the second one. And the third one we know was, from the name of it, was not Hosea's. Those children's names were Jezreel, Leruhamah, Lo-Ami. Jezreel, God sows. Leruhamah, I will no longer have mercy. Lo-Ami, you are not my people. What we learned in verses 10 and 11 of chapter 1, though, is that even though God had cast away, is going to have these people swallowed up by the Assyrians, they would be returned to him. They would have an opportunity at redemption, at restoration. They would have an opportunity even at resurrection. In fact, we noticed last week how the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Peter both drew on Hosea 1, 10, and 11, and other passages in Hosea 1 to talk about the restoration of Israel through the gospel in the last days. Okay, so a lot of good information in Hosea chapter 1. The last thing we learned in Hosea 1, verse 11, was that there would be this day when they would be reconciled together with one leader, with one head, and this would be the day of Jezreel. This would be the day when they would come up out of the land. In other words, it's the day when they had been buried, which means they would die, which means they were resurrected. And so this is the resurrection or the restoration of Israel. And this is, from my perspective at least, what Paul draws off of heavily in the 1 Corinthians 15. But we'll talk more about that as we get further. We need to get to Hosea 6 and then Hosea 13 before we talk about 1 Corinthians 15 too much. But I'm just going ahead and plant that idea in your mind so that you sort of see where we're going when we get there. All right, Hosea chapter 2, verse 1. Say to your brothers, Ami. Say to your sisters, Ruhamah. In other words, say to your brothers, my people. Say to your sisters, I will have mercy. So he's going to show them mercy eventually. They're going to be his people eventually, but first he's going to tell them all the things that they've done, sinned against him, and then show them the promise of restoration. And that's where he starts in verse 2. Contend with your mother. Contend, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her put away her harlotry from her face, her adultery from between her breasts, or I'll strip her naked and expose her as on the day when she was born. I'll also make her like a wilderness, make her like desert land, and slay her with thirst. And so we have this promise of a curse, but also potential for restoration. Either Israel, God's wife, would repent of her adulteries, or he would kill her, or she would be stoned. And that was the standard practice under the law. When someone committed adultery, the two individuals taken in the act of adultery would be put to death by stoning. Okay? And so God is giving her the proper punishment according to her law for this sin that she's committed against him. He says in verse 4, also I'll have no compassion on her children, because they are children of harlotry. For their mother has played the harlot. She who conceived them has acted shamefully. For she said, I'll go after my lovers, who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. Now this is what Israel was saying. I'm going to go after my lovers who give me all these blessings. But who was it that was actually giving her the blessings? God. Now we see this picture from the very beginning of Israel's history, right? They go into the wilderness. They've journeyed for about 3 months to the Mount Sinai. Moses has gone up to receive the law. And what did Israel do at the base of the mountain? They made the idol. And what did they say about that idol? Right, this is our God that's brought us out of the land of Egypt. And they're doing the same thing in Hosea's day. All these blessings that we've received in our kingdom, they don't come from the Lord. They come from some other individual, and particularly in this case, Baal. Right, that was the god that they followed after a lot was Baal, and he's going to discuss that on further down in the text. So let's see. We have a couple different things here. We have food items such as bread. We have clothing items such as wool, and then we also have things such as drinks. And so basically, they were blessing these other idols for these idols, not other idols, but idols for all the things that they had received, and they did not recognize who it was that actually gave them all the things that they were enjoying. Yes. Right.
And one of the things in the law was they should have another God beside them.
Yes, that's.
This is what God told Moses to get down off the mountain. People have corrupted themselves. Because at the time Moses received the law, they were down there making the golden calf.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They broke the very first commandment: "You shall have no other gods before me." And so, and the second commandment, they shall not bow down before any graven image. And so, both of these they broke. And this was the very foundation, of their society, was this relationship with God. And when they cast him off, when they cast God off, they at the same time cast off all the blessings that they have. This is something we need to remember, that anytime we want to pursue wealth and gain, whatever it may be, apart from God, we don't include him in our plans, we're also really casting off the opportunity to be able to truly enjoy those blessings that we might receive. We may have those goods, but the only way that we'll be able to truly appreciate and use those gifts is if we're in a relationship with God. And they had cast off God, and so God is about to say to them, well, if you've cast off me, you've also cast off all these gifts that I've given you, and not these false gods. In verse 6, we see, he says exactly that. Therefore, behold, I will hedge up her way with thorns, and I'll build a wall against her so that she cannot find her paths. She will pursue her lovers, but she will not overtake them. She will seek them, but will not find them. Then she will say, I'll go back to my first husband, for it was better for me than now. Okay, we have some imagery here that God uses in cursing Israel. One of those things was in verse 6, therefore, behold, I will hedge up her way with thorns. All right? This sounds familiar to you, doesn't it? That's the curse that was given to Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3, right? And so it seems like God is repeating some of those things found back there in Genesis 3 to his covenant people here in Hosea chapter 2. Okay, we also see that he would build a wall against her so that she cannot find her paths. Another way that you could say this, I suppose, is he's removing their light. As we know from Psalm 119, 105, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Well, in using this language in a different way, he's saying, I'm going to build a wall against her so she cannot find her paths. She's not going to be able to return back to me, though she may want to. This is the final straw, in other words, at least for now, at least until Christ. So he says in verse 7, she'll pursue her lovers, but she will not overtake them. She will seek them, but will not find them. Now, why won't she be able to find them? Well, okay, so she's pushed out. God casts her away, and she says at first, okay, I've got all these people that have taken care of me. Well, why can't she find them? Why can't she find Bel? He doesn't exist, right? She has falsely attributed the source of her blessings. She's falsely named the source of her blessings, and she's not going to be able to find them. And so she'll say, I'll go back to my first husband, for it was better for me than now. But it's too late. She's made her decision. Now here's something interesting. We see in verse 6, he says, therefore I'll hedge up her way with thorns. I'll build a wall against her so she cannot find her paths. Well, what does Jesus say? So he's going to make it difficult for them. They're not going to be able to find the way. And then what happens through the gospel? Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. No more is it filled with thorns and thistles. But he also says, John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So they had lost their way. They had lost their path. Their way was now difficult. And now Jesus is reversing that. Hey, I'm the way. You can get to God through me. And also the burden that I'll lay on you will be light, right? And so we have sort of a reversal in Jesus, what's happening to them through their being cast away into Assyrian captivity. All right. Verse 8. He says, for she does not know that it was I who gave her grain, the new wine, and the oil, and lavished on her with silver and gold, which they used for Bel. That's a striking idea, right? What did God tell the children of Israel to do on the night of the Passover? Before they were to leave out the next day, what were they to do? Right. Zelda? Oh, okay. So God tells them, go borrow these things from your neighbors. Basically, these are your spoils of war, basically, right? And what did they do with that gold and silver that God had given them? Turned it into the golden calf, as Keith mentioned a second ago, right? And this is exactly what is happening here in Hosea 2, verse 8. He's given them all these blessings, and they've used them for evil. Now, we can take a secondary application from that, can't we? And sometimes God gives us blessings and opportunities, and we use those for evil, in a sense. For example, let's say you have an individual who's given the ability to persuade somebody, and he's really good at persuading people. Well, he has an option, right? He could become a preacher, right? And use that talent that God's given him for good. But what else could he do? He could become a charlatan, right? He could go trick people, be a, do what? Be a con man. Okay. And so there's one way that somebody could use their gifts for good or for evil. Or maybe somebody's good with finances. They're good at managing money. They can predict the stock market real well, things like that. In one way, they could use that only for their own personal gain. But in another way, they could use that talent to help raise money for charities and help raise money for the poor and help raise money for awareness for human trafficking and dirty water and things like that we have in the world. And so we can use our talents just to build ourselves up, or we could also use them for good. And these blessings that were given to the people here in Hosea chapter 2, they used them for bad. They used them to worship Baal and not to bless the God of heaven. And here's what God says in verse 9. Therefore, I will take back my grain at harvest time, my new wine in its season. I'll also take away my wool and my flax, given to cover her nakedness. And then I will uncover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and no one will rescue her out of my hand. So think back again to the Garden of Eden. What did God do for Adam and Eve? He covered them, right? And
God just said when they first sinned.
right, they realized that they were naked, right? And then God covered them. Well, in Ezekiel 16, you have the same picture of Israel. Here she's been discarded out in the wilderness. And what does God do? He takes her and he covers her and he makes her his own. And the same thing is going on here in Hosea 2. He had covered her. He'd given her all these blessings. And now he's going to bring shame upon her. Where at one point he saved her, he redeemed her, he made her his own. Now he's casting her back off and taking away the blessings that he gave to her.
Does God bring shame upon us, or do we bring shame upon ourselves?
Well, he's...
Going way back to Adam and Eve, you know, when they were innocent and was walking as God told them to walk and doing the things God told them to do. Yes, they were naked, but there was no shame. The shame was that they disobeyed God. Therefore, when they disobeyed God, then there's the innocence left. There's no more innocence.
Right.
So, because of their act, shame was brought upon them.
Well, shame is being brought to them here because God is shedding light on their sin and uncovering it.
Yes,
so,
but are they? God didn't bring the shame. They were bringing the shame. He was something.
Sure. Yes.
Pointing out what was going to happen because of them disobeying.
Yeah, that's true.
The shame is that we don't bring it today when we're naked before God, and that there is such thing as a spiritual nakedness. When we're naked before God, that we bring upon shame upon ourselves because we fail to do what God tells us to do, or to
Right.
abide in God's law. That makes us naked, spiritually naked before God.
Right. So in this case, you know, to the world, she would appear rich and glorious and beautiful.
Right.
And what God had done was, He says, "Okay, you abuse these blessings. I'm going to take away take away them from you." And so what He was doing was mainly revealing, you know.
It was already there.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Any other comments? Okay, so he says, verse 11, "I will also put an end to her gaiety, her feasts, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her festal assemblies." See, God does not want their worship if they're not willing to do it right. You know, if they're not willing to have a good attitude about it, you know, if they're not willing to show mercy to each other, as he goes on and he says later, if they're not willing to have knowledge of God, true knowledge of God, then all these things that they were doing were just vain and empty things. Anything that we do vain and empty, God doesn't want. Ashley?
Notice how he says, "I'm going to put an end to your. Now it's no longer his, you know, it's like it's yours." And I'm thinking, it reminds me of what Jesus said, you know, your house is left unto you desolate. Like this, I don't want it anymore. It's yours. It's not mine. It's not honoring me.
Right. Yeah, right.
That language just connects.
Right, listen to Isaiah chapter 1. This is Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 13. He says, "Bring your worthless offerings no longer. Incense is an abomination to me. new moons and Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies. I cannot endure iniquity and the solemn assembly. I hate your new moons, festivals, and your appointed feasts. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. So when you spread your hands in prayer, I'll hide my eyes from you. Yes, even though you multiply prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are covered with blood. And this is basically the idea of Hosea 2. They were attempting to go through these motions, but they were empty because they weren't allowing this, they weren't allowing the covenant that God had made with them to actually make a change in their life. It's very easy for us to slip back into the motions, to sing songs, for example, without thinking about, what the words mean. To just let the words come off of our lips and never think about what we're actually saying. It's very easy for us to swallow the cracker and down the grape juice without ever giving a second thought to what those emblems mean, And whenever we act in that way, God doesn't want them anymore. It's useless if we don't offer them up with the right attitude, with the right heart. And that's why Jesus in Matthew 15 and why Hosea, as we're going to get into as we study more of his book, they both made the comment, Jesus, of course, drawing on Hosea, that, sacrifice and offering I would not, but I want mercy. I want rather than sacrifice. I want you to love me, not just go through the motions. It was never about just going through the motions. Okay, Hosea 2 and verse 12. I will destroy her vines and fig trees, of which she said, these are my wages which my lovers have given me. And I'll make them a forest, and the beasts of the field will devour them. Symbolic language. We'll see who those beasts are in a second. I'll punish her for the days of the bells, when she used to offer sacrifices to them and adorn herself with her earrings and jewelry, and follow her lovers so that she forgot me, declares the Lord. And so, again, she's being punished for idolatry. She's being punished for misusing the very gifts that God had given her. So in a sense, misusing the gifts that God has given you could end up being idolatry, right? You don't have to have a golden calf that you're bowing down to be worshiping, idolatrously. That's even a word. You don't have to have a graven image to be going against God. Junior, do you have a...
You want to say punish? In verse 13, you want to say I will punish?
Yes, what does yours say? Visit? Right, so the day of visitation is another way of saying the day of judgment, or a day of punishment. And so we have lots of days of visitations and day of the Lord's and day of judgments in the Bible. So yeah, that's a good point. Let me show you an example of that. Look at 1 Peter chapter 2. And notice how this plays in. This is actually perfect. That was a great point here. Look at 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 10 through 11. He says, for you were once not a people, but now you are the people of God. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. But beloved, I urge you as aliens and by the way, he's pulling from Hosea 1 and 2. You're not a people, now you're a people. You haven't received mercy, now you've received mercy. Look at verse 10 and 11. Behold, I urge you as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. So you see how the day of visitation even correlates back to Hosea chapter 2. That will be the day when God will visit them. Now it is talking about back there, God visiting them via the Assyrians to bring them into Assyrian captivity. But notice how this judgment language is used in both texts. I think that's interesting. That's why it's good to look at different versions of the Bible, because you kind of get the full meaning of the passage when you look at it from 2 or 3 different ways like that. Okay, verse 14. Now we have this entire, first 13 verses, particularly verses 2 through 13, are dealing with how God's going to judge them for rejecting him. But there's always a but, with God. There's always, well, that's true, but here's one more thing with them. And so In Israel's history, here's what it is. He says, therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak kindly to her. Then I will give her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor as a door of hope. And she will sing there as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up from the land of Egypt. So he's talking about here a second Exodus, bringing them out from captivity, so to speak, a second time. And there's just a ton of passages in the Old Testament, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and on, that speak about this second Exodus. He says in verse 16, it will come about in that day, declares the Lord, that you will no longer, or rather that you will call me Ishi, which means my husband. That's right. And will no longer call me Baali, which means my master or my Bel. And so see how he is reversing what they've gotten themselves into, basically. For I'll remove the names of the Bels from her mouth, so that they will be mentioned, by their names no more. In that day I will also make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field. Now wait, pause there a moment. Look back up to verse 12. See, he's going to destroy them, the very last part of that verse, with the beasts of the field. Well, here he's going to make a covenant with the beasts of the field. This is God making a covenant with the Gentiles, the very Gentiles that had at one point trampled Israel underfoot. He offers up a door of salvation to them as well. Salvation isn't just limited to Israel. It's offered up to everyone, including the very beasts of the field that God had used to destroy Israel in times past. He says he's going to make a covenant with them, or for them, with the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, the creeping things of the ground. I will abolish the bow, the sword, and war from the land, and will make them lie down in safety. Do you see how this kind of goes back to the Genesis story as well? It's using this language we've already read so far it's used the language of the thorns that are going to come up in their inner land. It's used the language of, what else do we have here? It's already passed my mind. Oh, the nakedness there, uncovering the nakedness. Then we also have this imagery here, finally, of the, where did it go? Oh, yes, of making a covenant with the beasts of the field, etc., etc., etc. So you see how God is drawing on this creation language from Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 to paint this picture of Israel's restoration. That's because Israel's restoration would be the creation of what? Of a new something and a new something else. A new heavens and a new earth. So God is using this creation language to paint the picture of their new creation, of the new heavens and new earth. And so when you talk about the new heavens and new earth in the New Testament, like in 2 Peter 3 and Revelation 21, what you're talking about is the restored kingdom of Israel. But not only with just Jews and the northern tribe Israelites, but also beasts of the field, birds of the air, creeping things of the ground. Also, in other words, Gentiles, people of every nation, tongue, and tribe get to participate in this new covenant, in this new heavens and new earth, in this new marriage between God and his people. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, the last part of this passage, verse 18, says, I will abolish the bow, the sword, and the war from the land. I'll make them lie down in safety. Okay, so abolishing the bow, the sword, and the war. We know this is also talked about in Isaiah 2. That's probably where your mind would go. That's where my mind goes. But this speaks to the transformation of Israel from a national geopolitical, kingdom to a heavenly kingdom. One where they pick up swords and go out and fight, and one where they lay down their swords, they turn their swords into, pruning hooks, and they toward their spears in the plowshare, and they go out and they farm, peaceful people instead of a warlike people. No longer do we have a piece of land to defend as the people of God. We have a heavenly kingdom, one where we don't have to take up swords and spears and things like that anymore. And so this is what this is speaking to. And of course, I've already given you the reference, and I know you're familiar with it, Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 4, that talks about that. So this is the same idea, the restoration of Israel in the last days. This last part here, he says, I'll make them lie down in safety. What Where does that take your mind to? When you see that phrase, lie down in safety, what do you think about there? The what? Yeah, the 23rd Psalm. The 23rd Psalm. So Psalm 23, he says he makes me lie down in green pastures. Well, check this out. Go in your New Testament to Revelation chapter 7. Revelation chapter 7, you can actually see how this is fulfilled. In Revelation chapter 7, he says this, verse 15 through 17. For this reason, Revelation 7, 15 through 17, he says, for this reason they're before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits down on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. They will hunger no longer, nor thirst any more, nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd, will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Now, this doesn't have that language of he'll make them lie down in green pastures, but still the idea there of them lying down in safety, of God being their shepherd and taking care of them, being a good husband to them, can be seen in passages like Revelation 7, 15 through 17, both pulling from the shepherd imagery used in the 23rd Psalm. And so Hosea 2 is all about the time when God's going to restore them. He's going to bring them back to where they belong. And where they belong, of course, is in a covenant with him. You've probably heard this phrase before, especially this attributed, especially in connection with this whole idea of lying down. Two things were going to lie down together. Do you remember what those two animals were? Right. That's found in Isaiah chapter 11. Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 7, or really verse 6 and following. He says, and the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little boy will lead them. And the cow and the bear will graze, the young will lie down together, the lion will eat straw like an ox. The nursing child will play by the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child will put his hands on the viper's den. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, and the waters as the waters cover the sea. Now, this isn't saying that literally there's a day whenever Simba and Bambi are going to play together, in perfect harmony. It's not talking about a day whenever, Cherish will be able to pick up a snake with no fear. In fact, if you watch that video on Facebook that I saw about that man up in West Virginia, then you wouldn't want to get anywhere near a snake. But this is in a passage dealing with the restoration of Israel. Isaiah 11:11. That's exactly what he says. It'll happen on that day that the Lord will again recover the second time with his hand the remnant of his people. And so this is all about the restoration of Israel. This language that's using about them lying down in safely, not learning war anymore, it's just about the time whenever God would restore Israel under her Messiah. Okay, back to Hosea chapter 2, and we'll get to verse 19. So we have a couple of ideas here. And all these ideas go hand in hand, and they're just different ways to say the same thing. So we have, so far, we have a new covenant, right? He says he's going to make a covenant with the beasts of the field there in verse 18. We have the covenant. We also have a, what else? A new what else? We have a new heavens, a new earth. What did you say? Oh, okay. We have a new Israel, right? That which you sow is not quickened except it die. And that what you sow is different from that what comes up. So Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So you have a new Israel. You also have, as we're about to see here, a new marriage. So let's look. Verse 19. I'll betroth you to me forever. Yes, I'll betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice and loving kindness and in compassion. I'll betroth you to me in faithfulness. Then you will know the Lord. It'll come about in that day that I will respond, declares the Lord. I will respond to the heavens, and they will respond to the earth. And the earth will respond to the grain, to the new wine, and to the oil. They will respond to Jezreel. They will respond, in other words, to God sows. I will sow her for myself in the land. I'll also have compassion on her who has not obtained compassion. And I'll say to my people, to those who are not my people, you are my people. And they will say, you are my God. So we have, despite all of this casting away, despite all this judgment, we have this promise of a future restoration when there's going to be a bountiful harvest, whenever they're going to be his people again, and whenever he's going to be their God. And so this is all about the restoration of the children of Israel in the last days in their marriage to God. So we have a couple different ideas here. We got the idea of a new covenant, got the idea of a new heavens and new earth, got the idea of a new Israel. We also have the idea of this new marriage. Now these things, as we've talked about a little bit, are discussed in the New Testament, and most of them are discussed in Revelation, right? The new heavens and new earth, you obviously know about that in Revelation. Revelation chapter 21. I cannot think at this time of a place where the new covenant is specifically mentioned in Revelation, but you do have some elements there of the new covenant. Do what? Right, Jeremiah 31:31, and then Hebrews 8 through 13, or 8 through 10, something like that. But in Revelation 21, you have elements of the new covenant, right? The new temple.
But just one New Testament.
I was looking more at Revelation right now, but yeah, the new Israel in Revelation. You have, of course, in Revelation chapter 7, all those tribes being listed off as being restored. But also you have people of every nation, of every tongue, and every tribe, all being gathered to the Lord in Revelation chapter 7. And you also have this new marriage. There's two main places that it's discussed: Revelation chapter 19 and Revelation chapter 21. And so these things that we find in Hosea chapter 1 and Hosea chapter 2 are reiterated and discussed further in the book of Revelation. And so the point of all this is, you see then how the minor prophets are very influential in Revelation, how they're all together, they're all working together. It's all, they're all talking about the same thing, about the same time, and the same judgment eventually, and the same restoration. Now obviously Hosea is dealing with a particular judgment there, but to look forward to a time when all this is restored. That's right. That's right. So, the what? Yes, that's exactly right. Let me show you. We'll do that. So the new covenant, we have that discussed in Hebrews chapter 8. New heavens and new earth, we have that discussed in 2 Peter 3. The new Israel, we have that in Galatians 4 with the allegory, 21 to 31. And then the new marriage, as Johnny said, is discussed in Ephesians chapter 5. So all these things are reiterated in the New Testament, and it's all about the restoration of Israel, and which includes the restoration of the Gentiles and anybody else that wants to take part in this new covenant between God and man. Okay.
What is that, 2 Peter 1?
2 Peter 3. Sorry about that, yeah. 2 Peter 3. So, hopefully this gives you appreciation for the minor prophets. Shows you really how influential they are to our understanding of the New Testament. We're already at the 45 mark, so we might go ahead and cut it short. Chapter 3 is only 5 verses long, but it introduces something that is going to be very helpful to us in our study of Hosea and the other minor prophets. It's this idea of old David. We're going to talk a little bit about that next week, and focused the lesson on identifying David and talking about that. All right, any questions or comments before we close? Question for you, I guess. What do you think about all this language that Hosea is using from Genesis? This language of nakedness and thorns and thistles and beasts of the field, birds of the air, creeping things of the ground, things like that. It's pretty interesting, huh? I think that Genesis 1 is talking about the creation of the universe, but not everybody believes that. A lot of people believe he's talking about the creation of a covenant with man. Just throwing it out there for you. I'm not there yet myself, but when I say I'm not there yet, that doesn't mean I'm headed there. Because I said I'm not there yet to somebody the other day on something else, and I didn't mean I was headed there at all. But I just meant I'm not there at this point in my studies. I'm not there yet, but you could probably see how somebody could see that with all this same type of language. But we shouldn't allow similarity of language to demand that two things are talking about the same thing. But it is interesting to see how that language is used, right? Okay. I've got nothing else. Anybody else got anything?